Hello everyone, I just want to make a quick video on learning how to learn. In other words, as a developer, whether you are completely self-taught, went to a university, or, went to a boot camp, there eventually comes a point where you have to learn on your own and explore things on your own in order to become a better developer. I think a lot of courses, including mine, they say, hey, explore these things, learn these things, do it on your own. But they never provide any guidance on how to do that or where to start and so on and so forth. In this video, I just want to focus on developing a self-curriculum plan and some tips and tricks I do to help me develop that plan and execute that plan as well. If you like these kinds of videos, definitely let me know. I have a lot of tips and tricks that I use that are more specific than this video. For example, tips and tricks I use when I'm looking at new code. But this video is just going to be focusing on generating a plan. So here I am on awards.com and I see a really cool site of the day made by Dog Studio, which is one of the coolest digital agencies out there. And I already have it loaded up. But this could be applied to a lot of use cases. You could use this website for your portfolio. Obviously not this exact website, but some of the concepts in here, like the 3D model or clicking on elements in 3D. So let's say you wanted to recreate a website like this. Where do you even start? There's so much to do. You can see particles everywhere. You see foliage. You see the 3D model itself, obviously. So where do you even start? Well, like most things, you have to break things up into its parts. So the first thing I would probably ask myself is, how do I even model something like this in the first place? And so let's just type that onto our self-curriculum plan. How do I even model this? Okay, but this question is kind of broad. There's really no guidance on how to even execute on this. So that brings me to my first tip, which is using the network tab to actually grab the model. So if you hit Control-Shift-I and navigate to the network tab, you're gonna have to refresh the page. And now you can see we have all their assets loaded right into the network tab. And we know that the GLB/GLTF is probably the most common format for loading models on the web. So let's just try searching for that. So I'll type in GLB. And would you take a look at that? We actually have a GLB file here. So you can download this by simply right-clicking on it and opening it in a new tab. And then you can just save it onto your desktop. Go to some of the GLTF viewers online for free. For example, gltf.report, which is really popular. Now I think there's like 10 that I know of that can view GLTFs in the browser, so it's up to you. So now that we have their GLB file, well, we can just open up Blender, import it, and take a look at it. And let's just import that downloaded model and take a look. We have it right here. Yeah, now that you have their model here, you can essentially develop yourself, how you want to model something similar and what to look at. For example, they have a bunch of foliage here, and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't look anything like the tree in the browser. So what did they do? Well, if you go into YouTube and just type in trees in Blender and look at any of these tutorials, for example, I'll just click on this one. And when you skip through the video on how to make trees in Blender, you'll actually notice that they also use a plane to have a alpha image and cut out the alpha channel to create leaves instead of actually creating, hundreds of millions of vertices for actual leaves, but just an image with a plane on it. And now you know how to make that tree that you see in here and in Blender as well. So if we come back to our self-curriculum plan, how to model specific things, you can just look them up on, in Blender. Maybe you are looking for Gothic architecture, for example. Well, then you can go into YouTube and, just type a look at Blender Gothic architecture and hundreds of tutorials that you can watch. Back to our self-learning curriculum, I just added a few things here, but you can add more, of course. But you already created yourself a plan. Okay, so how do I model specific things like foliage, like trees, like bushes? How do I use alpha textures in both in Blender, which is shown in the tutorial, and as well as three.js? And you already created so many things that you can be better at as a creative developer. Yeah, so we've created a nice plan here, but we didn't really essentially learn much new. You could figure this out all on your own without, looking at an awards winning website, right? So, let's talk a little bit about, more discovery based things. So let's go back to their network tab, and I'm just going to scroll through here really slowly. And let me know if you notice anything that might be worth investigating just by looking at these here. Now, it obviously depends on your experience level, but there are, if you're a beginner, things like these would be of interest to check out. Like, what does AO stand for? Oh, and, if you're into 3D, that means ambient occlusion, and D stands for, and D stands for diffuse, and N stands for normal, and so on and so forth. Actually, let's just say for a minute you don't even know what this actually stands for. So the first thing that I would do is drag it into images.google and take a look at, something similar to it. So I'm just going to drag it into Google. And it'll find you something that looks similar to whatever you're looking for. So here looks like something very similar. So I'm just going to click on open that. And it's going to bring me to ArtStation, and I'm just going to scroll through it until I find that image that I like. And here right away, if you had no idea about anything about 3D modeling, you now know that it's called a normal map. Okay, cool. So let's discover what a normal map is. And when you look up what a normal map is, of course, you're going to come over UV editing, more things about textures and so on and so forth, etc., etc. I think most of you who've watched me already know what those are anyway. But let's take a look at something that's kind of a little more niche and, a little more advanced. And when I scroll through here, you should notice something called .k2x2. And they named it pretty well. And it has names like foliage, concrete. These things, they sound like baked textures. But what is K2x2? So now you can look, what is .k2x2? And of course, just search it up into your search engine, just open a bunch of resources in a new tab and just scan through some resources and just read about what K2X2 is and why did this award-winning digital agency decide to use .k2x2. And when you read about it, you'll see, oh, hey, it's a very super compressed texture that, is optimized for the GPU, and here's like a tool to use it, and I guess there's other tools to use, and so on and so forth. So then you can go into a deep dive onto basic textures. Of course, if you want to use it with three.js, you can just look it up, K2X2 loader three.js, go to their documentation and read that as well. Of course, you can put links here, K2X2 loader, and so on and so forth. And this discovery phase even goes beyond, just what you're initially looking for. For example, maybe you have no interest in audio whatsoever. Well, you can just put it onto a different plan. So, for example, I was looking at a bunch of award sites and I saw something like .ogg, and then you can just look up, oh, what is OGG file extension? And then you can deep dive into that as well. Yeah. So then I just want to talk about some viewers that you can easily view .k2x2 if you want to. So for example, let's, maybe just entrance door diffuse. Let's just take a look at this. I'm going to save it. And one that I like is sandbox.babylonjs.com. You can just drag the K2x2 texture and just kind of view it straight in your browser. You don't have to install tools to convert K2X back to an image and so on and so forth. Okay, so we have a 3D plan. Let's take a look on, maybe about, the 2D plan. So let's say, you're looking at something like this and you see, something really cool like this text is like glitching basically, or changing between letters before actually settling down on what they're reading. So of course, go onto YouTube and take a look at some tutorials that cover that effect, or something that covers something similar. So here you can see this guy made a cool tutorial about text that kind of changes before it settles. Of course, it's not exactly the same effect as you see on this website, but it's pretty close that you can probably, with some trial and error, replicate exactly like this after watching this video. So, that's a 2D plan, glitchy text effect with JavaScript. And now you might be saying, okay, how do I even make this? Did they use a div, div on hover, some border radius or whatever? Yeah, and let's say you want to, recreate that button, more specifically, of course, you can go into developer tools and just click on it and take a look. Hey, oh, it's actually an SVG. You can take a look at their CSS and how they created it and so on and so forth. Go to computed for the styling and, fonts and you can take a look at their fonts, what they used, their backup, yeah, and so much there. And if you want, you can quickly just view it. So I don't know, maybe just right click, copy element, and just go into the browser, type in SVG viewer, I don't know, code or something like that. Come up and just find the first tool and just copy and paste it right there. And hey, take a look. Now you can view the SVG right in your browser. So not only did you know that they used SVG for a button, you can look at things like SVG on hover effects, and so on and so forth. And you can look at their CSS code, CSS code, find similar typography to what they're using, find similar typography, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's so much you can learn just by exploring. So, of course, I just call this random stuff, but, organize it however you want. So, I guess one thing you can see is naming conventions. So, you can see marker label layer underscore, and you can just look at their naming conventions and kind of just see, um, if you like it or not. And if you want to implement it yourself, naming conventions for CSS classes, maybe you've just been randomly naming your stuff, but you want to be more professional. So look into that, and when you interact with something, you can take a look at the CSS styles that are actually changing. So here you can see this is an entire UI menu. And when you close it, you'll actually analyze, the styles that are changing when you're changing it and what classes are active and kind of how they implemented that as well. So, styles changing on interaction, and this will give you kind of a guidance on how to implement things. You'll notice that a bunch of classes are added here as well. See menu interactive and so on and so forth. And yeah, I mean, this is kind of like how I started when I had no idea how to even recreate an effect. I just kind of looked at, what was changing when it was actually moving. And I just see things like this. Oh, Translate 3D. I never heard of that before. Well, let me just look up a tutorial on Translate 3D and how that works and how I can implement something similar. And outside of, the specific stuff, of course, you can just look at broad observations. For example, your camera moves on wherever your cursor is. So you can add that here. Camera rotate on cursor. And so you can go on to things like discourse 3.js, which is the official discourse, and just, make a new topic. Of course, search to make sure it's not already covered. And just ask, for resources seeking, and so on and so forth. And then that's how you implement that. So then you have this on scroll movement, which has several examples in 3.js that people have already created, including my own tutorial and where I animate on a curve. So maybe something like animate on curve, animate camera, animate camera, animate camera on curve. Of course, if you're in Bruno Simon's course, which I really recommend, you can also ask in here as well, your 3.js related questions or WebGL related questions. Of course, you also have something like HTML inside of the worlds that you can take a look at, ask about, look at previous examples. You also have like reflective material here. You can see that's kind of reflecting the HDRI as we move around. So, you can just look at the examples and, like React 3 Fiber or 3.js and, oh, hey, look, this has reflective material. And you can just take a look. Hey, this is doing the same behavior that I see here. Okay, let me see how they implemented and so on and so forth. Reflection on materials, so on and so forth. And other observations, you can see things like this, which look like God rays. So you can look at something like three.js God rays and take a look at that. And then furthermore, you can take a look at the multiple implementation styles of God rays. So there's another creative developer who's really awesome. You should totally follow him. He made a tutorial on how you can fake God rays with meshes, um, so you don't actually have to do those high performant God rays like this one here. And you can see other things like floating particles. So how do I do that? Floating particles. And there are a lot of resources actually on floating particles. So I just know that from Googling a lot. And Bruno Simon also actually covers it in his course, which I do highly recommend as usual. So my last tip is to actually follow people in the field. Create a social media account, and you don't have to use it. I didn't even have Twitter for a while, or I never used it until someone actually recommended me to start following other people in your field. And sometimes they'll lay out like tips and tricks on deconstructing award-winning websites, and they are really helpful. So Akela is one. He has his own YouTube channel where he makes amazing WebGL related content. Subscribe to this guy for sure. Of course, there are many other creative developers. If you want a list, feel free to ask me. But yeah, sometimes you might not find any resources other than what another developer is laid out on social media. And you don't even have to follow specifically people working with WebGL. Game developers, a lot of their principles are translatable straight into three.js and shaders and that kind of stuff. Follow people that are related to your interests, and you'll learn a bunch of tips and tricks that you might not even know where else to find other than social media and that will help you execute on your plan. Yeah, and just in a few 15 minutes, we've created a pretty good plan. And if you follow this plan, or approach it however you want, spend as much time as whatever you want on it, you'll already become a better developer than you were before you even started. Again, if you do like this kind of video on learning how to learn, so you don't need tutorials anymore, you don't need courses anymore, let me know, and I'll go into some more specific things like tools that I use to convert models that can be easily downloadable, or how I analyze code that I've never seen before, an effect that I want to, how I approach that and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely let me know, and thanks for watching. Take care.